2. The educational system on Alpine was quite flexible, and he hadn't spent much time in formal schooling. Also, the isolation of the family establishment had tended to diminish contacts with other children. The result that he had only a few friends near his own age, a lack that had never notably concerned him. Of those few, he could think of none that he was really going to miss. But when, in the morning, after Mr. Lombok had departed on what everyone had agreed must be a futile mission to the adoption center, Michel's mother suggested that he call one or two of the children, at least to say goodbye. Goodbye. He complied. Of the three he called, two were bored by his great news, or tried to sound that way. The third, awed and openly envious, wondered aloud how Michael felt about going through the bottleneck, where there was almost certain to be fighting. Michel, who was somewhat keen on space war, at least as it was fought in the juvenile adventure books, and considered himself a well-informed layperson on the subject, estimated the risks as somewhat lower. After all, the ship captains and the other folk in charge would not decide to risk the passage if they thought it prohibitively dangerous. Mr. Lombok was back in a couple of hours, announcing that he had been unable to learn anything, but not looking disappointed. Were Carmen and Michel ready? He was going to call the spaceport on the chance that it had been decided to move up departure time and they had not got around to notifying him. Good thing I did, he announced. A couple of minutes later, turning away from the privacy of the communicator console. Good thing you're ready, too. The last shuttle lifts off 3 hours from now. It took the four of them something over an hour in a family aircraft to reach the airport. Michel had visited it twice before, once on a tour with his school class, and again to see off a visiting uncle from Estill. This time he said goodbye to his father on the ramp, feeling a moment of sharp sadness as they embraced. Then the three travelers were hurried into a shuttle, a larger craft than that which had borne away the uncle, and with its hull bearing a hash of letters and numbers, some military designation. His first shuttle flight did not feel all that different from a straight climb in an aircraft, at first. He and his mother and Mr. Lombok were the only passengers. As the sky outside the cleared ports purpled and darkened, a young woman wearing the insignia of an ensign in the personnel services came to sit with them and chat. No one but Michel seemed to notice when the artificial gravity came on in the cabin. He did, though, subtle as the difference was, and felt immediately afterward how the great thrusters underneath began to multiply their force. And as the blue of the atmospheric daylight faded, he began to be able to see some of the convoy escorting them. Mr. Lombok had spoken reassuringly but vaguely of its strength. There were 6 good-sized ships hanging in formation, small crescent sun glits against the starless black. But wait, there rode 6 more in another flight higher up, and wait again, 6 more beyond. When he had counted 6 flights of warships waiting, and understood that there might be more beyond his range of vision, he began to wonder what was going on. More avidly than his parents realized, he followed the news of the war in space, and not all of the books he read on the subject were juvenile novels. A collection of the ships this strong ought to be called a task force or a battle fleet. Mr. Lombok had implied that this force had come more or less straight out to Alpine from Earth, and that it was now going straight back. For what? His mother dutifully noted the various flights of warships as he pointed them out to her, smiled at his keenness. Sorry about that. Find where I'm at again here. And went on rehearsing for Mr. Lombok the speeches she meant to use on important people when they got to the academy. Mr. Lombok, now looking totally relaxed, gave her his smiling attention, only now and then directing a sort of proprietary glance toward Michel. Only when the starship in which they were to ride at last loomed overhead, like a continent of metal dimly lighted from below by Alpine's blue glowing dayside, did Carmen at last take a real look. "I'll certainly feel safe on that," she commented, peering upward, and then looked around to make sure that their meager baggage had not somehow crept away and lost itself. Michel observed the docking as best he could, and before the shuttle was swallowed inside the thick hull of the Leviathan, he had the chance to glimpse her name, running in comparatively modest letters across her skin of battle gray. She was the Johann Carlson. He sat there looking out the port at nearly featureless dark metal, about a meter from his nose. The convoy, or fleet, was not only sizable, but contained at least one vessel of the Dreadnought class, the very one aboard which he and his mother were about to have the fun of a voyage lasting maybe for some 4 standard months. Except that with each passing moment, Michel felt less certain about the fun. He pondered, and decided it was too late now to do anything but go along. Departure followed docking within minutes. Michel and his mother were shortly settled into modest but comfortable adjoining cabins, and the friendly young woman officer, who was evidently their assigned friend, came to take them on a tour of the parts of the ship accessible to strangers. She was full of explanations and always reassuring. That evening they all dined with the captain. The captain was a tall, gray woman with a harsh, angular face that softened briefly, but remarkably when she smiled, who asked in an abstracted way if there was anything they wanted. Ship's time had been adjusted to match local Alpine time at the longitude of the Julinx establishment. Coincidence or not, the peculiarity of this adjustment was not lost on Michel. It did nothing to ease his growing sense of something stranger than a long space voyage getting underway. His father, his bio-father, whom he had never seen and did not know, was locked up in a filing cabinet somewhere aboard the Johann Carlson, screaming for his son to let him out. It was up to Michel to make his way through a complexity of locks and barriers to find the trapped man. But before he could get the machinery well in hand, he realized that he had just been dreaming and was now awake. He sat up in the unfamiliar bed in the totally dark cabin, listening very intently. Thrum. Wom, 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 wom. I don't know. He had never before felt the interior tug, perceived as a shadowy twisting in the bones and guts. That was a side effect of the energies released when a C-plus cannon fired close at hand. But in his space war books, he had read descriptions enough of the effect. Uh, this here, well, you'll see this more here. C plus. That means over light speed, because the E equals MC squared. and that's mass times the speed of light squared, right? So that's c plus, so faster than light speed. That's what that means whenever they use that. Whenever Fred uses that. Thrum, thrum, thrum. When he had attended, fully awake, for half a minute, he was no longer in any doubt. He counted hours back to departure. Probably they had reached the bottleneck already, or were very near it. They wouldn't be firing for practice here. Thrum, thrum, thrum. And he thought, or maybe that's thrum, thrum, thrum. And he thought that they would never practice fire so steadily. It would be too hard on the vital equipment, the force manifolds in particular. Leaving the room dark, he remembered just where his clothes lay on the floor. He slid out of bed and started to get dressed. He was three-quarters clad when his door was lightly opened to admit from the lighted passageway the young woman officer, Ensign Schneider. She looked surprised to see him on his feet and moving. "What's wrong, Michel?" There was a straining lightness to her voice. "Don't you know?" he asked, mechanically, feeling sure she did. "We're under attack." He paused, one arm sleeved in his shirt, one not, sensing. "I don't hear any." "Or we were. The firing stopped just now." She was smiling at him uncertainly when Lombok stepped in from the hall behind her, wearing a robe that made him look a little like a little brown bird. He appeared almost elated to see that the boy was up and getting dressed. "Something wake you, Michel?" "Why were these people acting like idiots?" "I want to see Mr. Lombok. Do you suppose I could just look in on the bridge? I promise I won't disturb anything." Lombok studied him a moment, then turned to the young woman. "Ensign, why don't you just see if Mr. Jewlinks is restless too?" Then he turned away, indicating with a motion of his head that Michel should follow. Mrs. Jewlinks is restless too." In the corridors the gravity had been reduced, just as it was always done on big ships in the stories, when combat alerts sounded. The soft hand grips built into the walls and overhead had become useful. He followed Lombok's fluttering brown plumage to the bridge, which, as Michel had expected, was a large, gray, brilliant room where a score of acceleration couches were almost all occupied. The faces of the occupants would have alerted anyone that something more than a practice was at hand. There was one empty couch at the end of a row near where they had entered the bridge, and Lombok gestured to him into it with a kind of authority that Sixtus often worked at, but had never come close to attaining. In the church In the churchly silence, Michel clambered in and snugged the cover of the couch closed without conscious thought. It did not occur to him that he had never seen a similar mechanism before. Nor did he consider the fact that Lombok either could not see another empty couch, or did not choose to look for one, but rather stayed beside Michel's. The boy's attention was already caught by the huge simulated battle presentation that filled the center of the room. The multicolored hologram showed, like a bright tunnel zigzagging through coal, what must have been a section of the bottleneck, a jagged crevice of clear space surrounded by dark nebula. Strung irregularly through the tunnel and proceeding along it with what looked like painful slowness were green dots that, just in the stories, showed the disposition of the human fleet. The dreadnought itself, marked by a rhythmic, tiny flash of green, was shown near the middle of the tunnel, followed by a strong rear guard. A swarm of red dots, berserkers, came on the heels of the rear guard, which must be still heavily engaged. The dreadnought did not turn to help, nor did the strong advance guard which preceded her. They all fled for the end of the bottleneck ahead, for open space with its infinity of pathways for their flight. Of course, the hologram was no better than a good guess. Not even the dreadnought's instruments and the battle computers could very accurately interpret the specs of ships and machines seen at or near the light speed, flickering out of normal space and back again, hiding behind dark lobes of gas or dust, obscured amid a symphony of radiation. In a little while, Michel began instead to watch the battle as it was reflected in the face of the captain. In that mask of concentration, he read that things were going about as well as could be expected, given the size of the enemy force that had tried to ambush them and almost succeeded. Glancing back momentarily at the hologram, he saw a green dot of the rear guard suddenly disappear. Dots of red and green were coming and going all the time, like fireflies, as their positions were recomputed or they departed normal space and reappeared in it. But this particular disappearance was different. This green dot did not return. He had known somehow as soon as it vanished that it was never going to come back. An unknown number of human bodies, along with all their furniture and food supplies and good luck charms and weaponry, had just been converted into an almost random sleet of energy and subatomic particles. Michel swayed for a moment in his couch, not with fear, but with an empathic sharing of that experience. Okay. The mighty dreadnought fled, while the battle in the rear guard raged and swirled. The implacable red dots came on, mountains of metal that could know no fear or weariness. Michel could hear them calling faintly, with electric thoughts, calling him to join them and be free.